She lived in a small, worn-out hut at the edge of a village that seemed forgotten by time. The walls were made of mud and sticks, and the roof leaked whenever it rained. The floors were cold, and there were no warm blankets to cover her. The mother, young and thin, spent her days collecting firewood, fetching water from a distant well, and doing small chores for villagers in exchange for a few coins or some rice. Life had never been easy for her, but in the months before her baby arrived, it had become unbearable. She had no family to turn to, no one who could offer real help. The few people around her either did not care or looked down on her because she had no money, no status, and no husband. Every day, she walked through the village, carrying the weight of her pregnancy. The villagers would whisper when they saw her, their eyes full of judgment. Some said she should have planned better. Others criticized her for being alone, but she had no choice. She had no home, no work that could pay enough, and soon she would have a child who would need her entirely. Nights were the hardest. She would sit on the floor of her hut, rubbing her swollen belly, and imagine what the future might bring. She worried about the baby's health, about how she would feed it, and about whether she could keep it alive at all. Sometimes she would cry quietly so no one would hear. Sometimes she would pray to gods she barely knew, asking for a miracle she did not believe would come. Food was scarce. Most days she only had a little rice, a few vegetables, and occasionally some lentils. She had stopped buying meat and eggs long ago. Her body had grown weak, and she often felt dizzy and exhausted. She knew that when the baby came, her body might not be strong enough to provide even the little nourishment it needed. She had heard of other women in the village who had lost children because they could not afford proper care. The thought of that happening to her own baby filled her with fear. She tried to imagine life with the child. She pictured holding a small, warm body in her arms, feeling its heartbeat, hearing its tiny cries. She thought about how she would smile, even if no one else smiled at her, and how she would rock the baby to sleep. But then reality came crashing back. She had no crib, no clean clothes, no food, no medicine, and no one to support her. How could she keep a tiny life alive when she herself was barely surviving? The villagers were not kind. Some would laugh at her. Some would shake their heads in disapproval. People in her community had little sympathy for those struggling with poverty. They believed that life was what it was, and if you could not manage, that was your fault. She had nowhere to hide from their judgment. Each time she walked past them, she felt their eyes on her, their whispers like sharp blades in her heart. Sometimes she wished she could disappear entirely, so that she and her child would not face the cruelty of the world. At night the hut would be dark and cold. She would lie on the bare floor, listening to the sounds outside, dogs barking, distant voices, the river flowing far away. The wind would whistle through the cracks in the walls, chilling her to the bone. She had no money for firewood, so she would wrap herself in rags and try to sleep, knowing that tomorrow would bring the same struggle, and the day after that, and the day after that, until the baby arrived. Her mind was full of questions and fears. Could she feed the baby? Could she keep it warm? Could she protect it from sickness? Could she face the judgment of the villagers if they found out she could not care for it? These thoughts haunted her constantly. Sometimes she would sit on the edge of the riverbank staring at the flowing water and wonder if there was a way out, a way to give the baby a chance at life that she could not give. She felt trapped, as if the walls of her hut and the poverty around her were closing in tighter each day. She remembered her own childhood, which had been full of hardship as well. Her parents had struggled to feed her and her siblings. She had learned to survive on little, to make do with what she had. But this was different. This was a life she had brought into the world, a life she wanted to protect, and yet she felt powerless. The thought of failing that tiny soul filled her with despair. People often asked her why she did not seek help from the village,
elders,
or distant relatives. She did not have the heart to explain that they had abandoned her, that asking for help had only ever brought ridicule or empty promises. She had tried once or twice, only to be turned away. Each rejection left her feeling smaller, weaker, more certain that she had no way out. The baby was coming, and she knew she had to act before it was too late. Every step she took outside her hut was heavy with worry. She would pass other mothers with children, watching them laugh, play, and care for their babies, and she felt a deep ache in her chest. She longed to give that same life to her child, to feel the warmth and love of holding it close. But she also knew that longing alone would not feed or clothe it. The cruel reality of poverty had taught her that love, no matter how strong, could not keep a child alive without food, warmth, and care. Sometimes she imagined leaving the village entirely, taking her baby to a place where someone might help, but she had no money, no food to travel, and nowhere safe to go. Every idea she had seemed impossible. Every path she imagined ended in hardship, illness, or death. The river, which she had once seen as just a part of the landscape, now became a silent companion in her thoughts. Its flow seemed endless, carrying everything along with it. She wondered if it could somehow carry her child to safety. Even if she could not, night after night, she would sit with her hands on her belly, speaking softly to the child inside, telling it she loved it, that she would protect it if she could, that she hoped somehow it would survive. Her heart broke a little more each day, but she clung to hope, even if it was fragile and fleeting. She whispered promises she was not sure she could keep, imagining a life she might never see. The weight of her reality and the depth of her love for the unborn child made her feel both strong and powerless at the same time. She knew that soon. The time would come when she would have to make a choice. She did not yet know what that choice would be, but the fear of it kept her awake at night. She thought of the baby's tiny face, the tiny hands and feet. She wondered if it would even recognize her if she could not provide for it. Her mind was full of sadness and worry, but also determination. She had survived so far through hardship. Now she had to survive for two. Each morning, she woke with the rising sun, weak but determined to face another day. She went to the fields to gather what little food she could find, carried water from the distant well, and did chores for villagers who offered whatever small payment they could. She moved slowly, her body aching, but her spirit refused to give up entirely. She kept thinking of the baby inside her, imagining the tiny life that depended on her strength and courage. And so, life continued in the small, leaking hut at the edge of the village. Days were hard, nights were colder, and the future was uncertain. But through all the fear, sorrow, and struggle, one thing remained constant: her love for the child growing inside her, and the desperate hope that somehow, despite everything, that love could make a difference. She had no way out yet, but she knew that soon. She would have to find a path, even if it was the hardest path of all. The night the baby arrived was dark and heavy. With clouds covering the moon and the wind blowing cold through the cracks of the hut, the mother lay on the bare floor, her body racked with pain and exhaustion, the world shrinking to the small, dim space around her. Every contraction felt unbearable, and every breath came with fear and hope intertwined. She had waited months for this moment, yet now that it had come, she was unsure if she could face it. Her mind raced with worries about her ability to care for the child, whether she could feed it, keep it warm, or protect it from illness. Yet in the midst of her fear, there was a spark of love and anticipation for the tiny life she carried. Hours passed slowly. The sounds of the village outside were faint, a distant hum she barely noticed. Inside the hut, time seemed to stretch endlessly with the pain of labor. She gritted her teeth, her body trembling, and whispered words of encouragement to herself and to the baby she had yet to meet. She imagined what it would be like to hold it, to see its tiny fingers and toes, to hear its first cries. Her heart ached with longing and fear all at once. She wanted to survive, not just for herself, but for the small being depending on her. Finally, as dawn approached, the baby came into the world. It was tiny, fragile, and wet, crying weakly at first, but soon with a more urgent, demanding sound. The mother cradled it in her arms, feeling the warmth of its body against her chest, listening to the steady rhythm of its tiny heartbeat. She was overwhelmed by a flood of emotions, relief, joy, fear, and love so deep it nearly crushed her. She stroked its head gently, whispering soft words she barely understood herself, telling it that she loved it and that she would do her best to care for it. But the reality of their situation was harsh. There were no clean clothes, no warm blankets, no food to offer the newborn. She wrapped the baby in an old, thin cloth, hoping it would be enough to keep it warm. She knew it was not. Her own body was weak from months of poor nutrition and exhaustion, and she could not produce enough milk to feed it properly. Every small cough or whimper from the baby sent a wave of panic through her. She wanted to scream at the unfairness of life, but she had no energy, no strength for loud protests. Instead, she held the child close and silently vowed to protect it with whatever little she had. The mother tried to calm herself, telling herself that the baby's cries were normal, that they were signs of life, yet deep down she knew that love alone would not be enough to keep it alive. She thought of the village children she had seen grow up healthy, fed, and warm, and felt a pang of jealousy and sorrow. She wondered if her child would ever know a life of comfort, laughter, or even basic security. The thought was unbearable, but she could not let it paralyze her. She had to think, to act, to survive for both of them. Throughout the day, she struggled to keep the baby calm, rocking it gently, singing soft songs from her childhood, humming lullabies she barely remembered. She scavenged what little food she could find in the hut, tearing bits of bread or stale rice and feeding them to the baby when it cried with hunger. The baby's small hands would clutch at her. She would feel a mixture of joy and despair, knowing that no matter how much she loved it, her efforts might not be enough. Her body ached, her eyes burned from lack of sleep, and yet she could not rest fully, for the baby needed her constant attention. As the sun rose and the day stretched on, the mother thought about the future. She thought about the impossibility of feeding the baby consistently, of keeping it healthy, of protecting it from the dangers of the world outside. She considered reaching out to villagers for help. She knew that asking for assistance could bring shame, judgment, or rejection. Many of them would not understand her desperation. They would see only her inability to provide and blame her for it. She felt isolated, as if she and her child were alone against the world. She walked slowly outside, carrying the baby, feeling the thin cloth between her fingers and the small body in her arms. The morning air was cold, and she shivered, pulling the baby closer. She watched other mothers pass by with their children, laughing, talking, and sharing small moments of happiness. She felt a deep longing, a painful contrast between her reality and theirs. She wanted to provide her child with the same warmth, the same comfort, the same safety. Yet she knew she could not. Her heart ached with this impossible love. It's a kind that burns and trembles but cannot fulfill itself. The mother spent the day trying to prepare a small space in the hut for the baby. Using old rags and whatever materials she could gather, she made a tiny bed on the floor, hoping it would be enough to protect the newborn from the cold at night. Every sound made her jump, the wind rustling through the cracks, a dog barking outside, a distant shout from a villager. She could not afford to relax, not for a moment, because the baby's life depended on her constant vigilance. And yet, despite her fear, she felt a quiet pride in her ability to survive and care for this small life, even if only for a few hours at a time. By evening, she was exhausted beyond measure. Her body ached, her hands trembled, and her eyes stung from crying. She held the baby close, whispering words of love and encouragement, telling it that tomorrow would be better, even though she knew nothing could guarantee that. She sat in the dim light of her hut, listening to the baby's soft breathing, and felt a strange mixture of hope and despair. She realized that every moment mattered, that every second she could keep the baby alive was a small victory against the harsh world outside. As night fell again, the mother struggled with a sense of hopelessness that weighed heavily on her. She knew she could not keep up this struggle forever. Food was running out, her body was weak, and there was no one to help her. Every decision she had made in the past months, every step she had taken to survive, had led her to this moment of deep fear and profound love. She held the baby tightly, feeling its warmth, and made silent promises to protect it for as long as she could. But in the quiet of the night, she also wondered if she would have to make a choice that no mother should ever have to make. The hours dragged slowly. She listened to the baby's tiny cries and felt her own heart break with each one. She sang softly, a lullaby from her own childhood, trying to calm it, to let it know that she was there. She loved it, that it mattered. Yet she could not ignore the harsh truth. Love alone could not feed the child, could not keep it warm, could not protect it from disease or danger. The weight of reality pressed heavily on her, and she realized that in order to give her child a chance at life, she might have to make a decision she never wanted to face. In the small hours before dawn, she sat by the window, holding the baby, watching the river in the distance. The flowing water seemed endless, carrying everything along with it. She thought of the baby's future, of what might happen if she could not care for it. Her mind was full of sorrow, but also determination. She could not give up, not yet. She had survived hardship before, and she would survive now for the sake of the tiny life in her arms. But she also knew that soon the moment would come when she would have to confront the impossible, when she would have to decide what was best for the child, even if it meant giving up something she could not bear to lose. Through the long night, she held the baby close, whispering words of love and hope. She thought about what life might hold for them, about whether the baby would grow up healthy, strong, and loved. She could not see the future, but she clung to the small, fragile hope that somehow they would survive. Every breath she took, every heartbeat she felt, was a reminder that she was still here, and the baby was still here. And for now, that was enough. She did not know what the next day would bring, but she knew she had to face it, to keep going, to protect this small life with every ounce of strength she had left. Days passed slowly, each one feeling heavier than the last. The mother spent every moment tending to her baby, trying to provide warmth, comfort, and nourishment despite the constant lack of resources. She wrapped the baby in old rags, rocked it gently when it cried, and whispered soft words of love, yet the gnawing fear in her heart never left. She knew that love alone could not shield the child from hunger, sickness, or the cold nights that seeped through the cracks of her hut. Every day, her hope for a better future seemed to shrink under the weight of harsh reality. She tried to think of every possible solution. Could she ask for help from the villagers? But she remembered how people had looked at her with pity or judgment, their words sharp and unforgiving. She could not rely on them to care for her child. Could she take the baby to a distant relative? She had no family who could help, no one who would understand her plight or offer refuge. She was trapped, and the world seemed to offer no way out. She began to notice small signs of weakness in the baby. The cries were faint, sometimes almost imperceptible, and the tiny body shivered in the cold. She tried to feed it with what little milk she could produce, but it was not enough. Her own body was weak, and she felt powerless. Each cough or whimper from the baby made her heart tighten with fear. The thought of losing the child, of failing it when she loved it more than life itself, was unbearable. And yet she knew that if she could not find a solution, that fear could become a tragic reality. The mother spent hours staring at the river, its waters glistening in the sunlight, flowing endlessly toward a place she could not see. The river had become a symbol in her mind, a path that might carry the baby to safety, a hope she dared not fully acknowledge. She thought about leaving the child somewhere it could be found, somewhere it could live, even if it meant she could not see it again. The thought was almost too painful to consider. But the more she observed the baby's frailty, the more she realized that she might have no other choice. She walked through the village, clutching the baby close to her chest, and watched other families with their children. The laughter, the warmth, the ease with which they cared for their children brought both comfort and pain. She longed to give that same life to her own child, to see it grow safe and healthy, but she had no means to provide such care. Every step she took made her more aware of the impossible situation she faced. Her mind raced with thoughts and fears, her heart heavy with love and despair. Nights were the hardest. In the darkness of her hut, she would hold the baby tightly, trying to keep it warm against the chill that crept through the walls. She whispered to it, telling it stories of hope and love, imagining a life where it could grow strong and happy. But the stark reality was never far from her mind. She felt her own body weaken, her energy drain, and the weight of survival pressing down on her from every direction. She began to understand that in order to give the child a chance, she might have to do something that went against every instinct she had as a mother. The mother began preparing herself mentally for the decision she dreaded. She would sit by the river, watching the water flow, imagining the baby floating safely in a basket or wrapped in cloth, carried gently to someone who could care for it. Each time she pictured this, her chest ached with sorrow. Could she give up her child? Could she truly let it go, hoping that someone would find it and love it? The thought was like a knife to her heart, yet she could not ignore the reality that love alone might not be enough to keep it alive. She thought of the baby's first cry, the tiny hands that clutched her fingers, the soft warmth against her chest. Every memory was a reminder of her love and a reminder of her helplessness. She realized that she had to consider the child's life over her own desire to keep it close. She asked herself questions she had no answers to. Would the child survive if she left it somewhere safe? Would someone notice it? Take it in? Care for it? Could she bear the thought of walking away, knowing she might never see the child again? The weight of these questions pressed on her, yet she knew she had to find a solution before it was too late. As the days turned into nights, she made preparations quietly and carefully. She found a small piece of cloth, wrapped the baby gently, and ensured it was warm and snug. She thought about leaving a note or something small that could help identify the child, a clue to show that someone cared. Her mind was consumed by worry, fear, and hope all at once. She tried to imagine the child being found by someone kind, someone who could give it what she could not. She held on to this image desperately. Knowing it was the only chance the baby had, she practiced in her mind the route she would take to the river, imagining herself walking quietly, placing the baby safely and retreating without being seen. Every step in her imagination brought tears to her eyes. She thought of the villagers, the people who might judge her, and the danger that could come if someone discovered her plan. But she also thought of the baby's fragile life and realized that taking this risk was necessary. She could not do nothing and hope that somehow things would work out. The baby needed more than hope. It needed someone who could care for it fully. She could not provide that. Each night, she returned to her hut, exhausted and emotionally drained, holding the baby close. She whispered promises that she might not be able to keep, telling it that she loved it, that she wanted the best for it, and that somehow she would find a way to help it survive. Her heart ached with the knowledge that love and desire were not always enough in a world so harsh and unforgiving. She felt torn between holding on and letting go, between her own desire to keep her child and the desperate hope that it might have a better life if she made the hardest decision of all. The mother began to notice subtle signs of the baby's struggle. Its tiny body shivered more in the cold, its cries grew weaker at times, and the thin rags offered only minimal protection. She realized that the longer she waited, the greater the risk to the baby's life. The urgency of her decision grew heavier each day. She could no longer ignore the reality that the baby's survival might depend on a choice she had to make, a choice that went against every instinct in her being. In quiet moments, she would sit by the river, imagining the flow of water carrying the baby safely to someone who could care for it. The river became a silent confidant, a symbol of hope, and the possibility of life beyond her own limitations. She would watch the sunlight glint on the surface, imagining a tiny body floating safely, wrapped in cloth, and felt a small measure of comfort mixed with profound sorrow. She knew she could not keep the baby safe on her own. But perhaps, just perhaps, the river could deliver it to a life it deserved. Her heart was heavy with love, grief, and fear. She spent hours considering every possibility, weighing risks, and imagining consequences. She thought of the child's cries, the warmth of its small body, and the innocence it carried into a world that seemed harsh and unforgiving. She realized that her own survival was intertwined with the baby's, yet her ability to protect it was limited. Every decision she faced was filled with impossible choices, and yet she knew that she could not delay any longer. At night, she would hold the baby tightly, rocking it gently, whispering words of love and hope. Her thoughts were consumed by the reality of her circumstances and the urgent need to find a way to give the baby a chance at life. She knew that in order to protect the child, she might have to make the ultimate sacrifice, to trust and hope, and to release her grip on something she loved more than life itself. The weight of this decision pressed heavily on her. But she understood that sometimes love required letting go. Even when it broke her heart, She spent days and nights preparing, gathering small pieces of cloth, choosing the safest path to the river, and imagining the baby's survival. Every detail mattered, and every precaution was necessary. She felt the weight of responsibility like never before, understanding that a single mistake could mean the difference between life and death. Her love for the child fueled her courage even as fear and sorrow threatened to overwhelm her. She knew that she had to act, that she could not wait any longer, and that the path forward, though heart-wrenching, was the only way to give the baby a chance. The night was still and heavy, as if the world itself was holding its breath. The mother carefully wrapped her baby in the softest rags she could find, making sure every limb was protected from the cold. Her hands shook with exhaustion and fear, and her heart ached so much that it felt as though it might break. She held the tiny body close to her chest, feeling the warmth of its small life against her own. She whispered soft words of love, telling the baby that she loved it more than anything, that she wanted the best for it, and that it would survive, even if she could not protect it herself. Each word was a tear she tried to hold back, a promise she could barely believe she could keep. She stepped outside, the night air biting cold against her skin. The river flowed silently in the distance, reflecting the faint moonlight through the clouds. Her eyes were fixed on the path ahead, yet her mind was clouded with fear, sorrow, and hope all at once. Every step she took seemed heavier than the last. She moved slowly, making sure the baby was safe in her arms, imagining the worst at every turn, yet praying for the best. The world was dark around her, yet in that darkness, she could feel the enormity of what she was about to do. Her mind raced with memories of the months she had endured, long days of hunger, cold nights on the bare floor, and the constant fear that she might not survive, let alone protect the baby. She remembered the whispers of villagers, the judgment in their eyes, and the cruel world outside her tiny hut. And yet she also remembered the moments of love, the first kick she had felt, the tiny heartbeat she had carried within her, the warmth of the baby against her chest after birth. Those memories were both a comfort and a torment, reminding her why she loved the child so deeply and why letting go was the hardest decision she had ever faced. She reached the riverbank, her legs trembling under the weight of exhaustion and emotion. The water flowed steadily, carrying reflections of the moon and stars, as if the night itself were watching her. She placed the baby carefully in a small basket she had prepared, making sure it was secure and warm. She whispered words of hope into the air, hoping that someone kind would find the child, that it would survive, that it would be loved and cared for. She wanted to believe that the river would carry the baby to safety, that the current would guide it to a better life. But the fear in her heart was overwhelming. What if no one found it? What if it suffered alone? Tears streamed down her face as she adjusted the cloth around the baby, making sure it was snug and protected. She brushed back stray strands of hair from its tiny forehead, kissed it softly, and whispered once more how much she loved it. Every movement was filled with tenderness, yet every second brought the reality of the impending separation closer. Her body shook, her chest tightened, and her heart ached in a way that words could not capture. She had never known such a combination of love, fear, and despair. Finally, she placed the basket near the edge of the river, carefully positioning it so that it would not tip over in the current. She stepped back slowly, her eyes never leaving the small figure inside. She wanted to make sure it was safe, even as she knew that she could not stay. The wind rustled through the trees, the water lapped gently against the shore. Out. And the night seemed to hold its breath with her. She whispered one last prayer, hoping that someone, somewhere, would hear it and act to protect the child. She turned to leave, her heart breaking with every step. She wanted to run back, to scoop the baby into her arms and never let go, but she knew that doing so could endanger both of them. She had made the hardest choice of her life, and now she had to trust that the world, though harsh and unforgiving, might offer a glimmer of hope. Each step she took away from the river was heavy with sorrow, her eyes stinging with tears, her mind consumed with fear for the tiny life she had placed in the water's care. As she walked back to her hut, she could not stop thinking about the baby. She imagined someone finding it, wrapping it in warm clothes, feeding it, holding it close, and loving it as she had hoped to do. She pictured the baby growing strong and healthy, with a life she could never provide. She clung to these thoughts as tightly as she had clung to the child, finding a small measure of comfort in the possibility that her sacrifice might not be in vain. But the sorrow remained, a constant ache in her heart, reminding her of the love she had let go and the bond she could not break. Back in her hut, the emptiness was overwhelming. The silence was deafening, broken only by the distant sound of the river flowing steadily. She sat on the floor, wrapping herself in a thin blanket. Feeling the chill of the night and the absence of the small life that had been in her arms moments before, she whispered words of love into the darkness, imagining that somehow, through the river, the baby could hear them. Her heart ached with grief and hope intertwined, each beat a reminder of what she had done and why. She thought about the baby's future constantly, wondering if it would survive, if it would be loved, if it would know warmth and safety. Each thought brought a mix of pain and hope, and she could not rest fully. Sleep came in short bursts, filled with dreams of the baby, sometimes crying, sometimes laughing, sometimes safe and warm in someone else's care. She woke with tears on her face, her heart heavy. Yet she held on to the hope that she had done the right thing, that love sometimes required sacrifice, even when it hurt beyond measure. The days that followed were difficult. She could not shake the memory of placing the baby by the river, the sound of its soft breathing against her chest, the warmth she had felt. Each day she imagined someone finding the baby, holding it close, feeding it, and keeping it safe. She clung to these images as though they were lifelines, giving her a reason to continue living, to continue surviving in a world that had offered so little. Her own life remained hard, filled with hunger, cold, and exhaustion. Yet she drew strength from the hope that the baby might be safe. She visited the river often, looking for any sign that the child had been found, any indication that her hope had not been in vain. Each ripple in the water, each glint of sunlight on the surface, made her heart leap and sink in equal measure. She longed for a sign, a moment of reassurance that the tiny life she had sacrificed for was being cared for. The uncertainty was agonizing, yet she knew she could not turn back. She had made the choice out of love, out of a desire to protect the child from the dangers she could not shield it from herself. Through the long nights and difficult days, she held on to the memory of the baby's warmth, the feel of its small hands against her skin, the sound of its soft cries. These memories were both a comfort and a torment, reminding her of what she had done and why she had done it. She understood that love sometimes required the hardest sacrifices, the choices that no one else could make, and the courage to trust and hope. Even when it was fragile and uncertain, her heart remained heavy, yet she knew she had acted out of the deepest love, doing everything she could to give the child a chance at life beyond her own limitations. The river, silent and steady, became a symbol of her hope and her sorrow. She imagined it carrying the baby safely to someone who could care for it, and she drew strength from that vision. Each day, she would hold on to the thought that her sacrifice might not be in vain, that the tiny life she had held and loved might find safety and warmth. The act of letting go, though heartbreaking, became a testament to the depth of her love, the courage of her spirit, the impossible choices that love sometimes demanded. And in that, she found a small measure of peace, knowing that she had given everything she could, even when it broke her heart. The river flowed quietly, reflecting the morning light in gentle waves. The baby lay in the small basket wrapped in the thin cloth, its tiny chest rising and falling with the fragile rhythm of life. For a long time, it had been silent, as though it were waiting for someone to come. Then, faintly at first, came the sound of soft cries, weak but persistent. Somewhere along the riverbank, a passerby had noticed movement, a tiny sound that seemed out of place in the quiet of the morning. A fisherman, drawn by the unusual sight, approached cautiously, his eyes widening when he saw the small basket and the baby inside. The child's tiny body was shivering but alive, and the man felt a rush of urgency and compassion sweep through him. He knelt by the river, gently lifting the baby into his arms. The warmth of human touch seemed to awaken the baby further, and it cried more strongly, a sound that was both alarming and beautiful, full of life and need. The man wrapped the child carefully in his own coat, holding it close to his chest to provide warmth and comfort. He could feel the tiny heart beating rapidly against his own, a reminder of the fragility and preciousness of this new life. His mind raced with questions. Who had left this baby? Why? And most importantly, how could he ensure that it would survive? He hurried back toward the village, keeping the baby close, whispering soft words of reassurance, hoping that the sound of his voice would calm it. Villagers noticed him, curious about the bundle he carried, and people gathered, some offering blankets, others food. The community, though small and often judgmental, showed a rare glimpse of kindness. Women brought warm water, soft cloths, and small portions of food, while the men offered their hands to help. The baby's cries grew steadier as warmth and care surrounded it, and the first signs of comfort appeared on its tiny face. The mother, still hidden near the riverbank, watched from a distance, her heart heavy with sorrow and hope. She saw the strangers gather around the baby, felt a surge of relief mixed with pain, and whispered silent prayers, hoping that the child would be safe. She had done what she could, and now the world had taken over, offering the care and protection she could not provide. Every step the villagers took toward helping the baby was a balm to her anxious heart, a reassurance that her desperate choice had not been in vain. The villagers debated what to do next. No one knew whose child it was, and yet everyone felt responsible for its survival. They wrapped it carefully in soft clothes, offered nourishment, and watched over it with a level of attention and care that the mother could only have dreamed of providing. The baby responded to the warmth, its cries subsiding into soft whimpers, and then to peaceful sleep in the arms of those who had taken it under their care. In that small moment, the baby had found a glimmer of safety, a chance at life that seemed almost miraculous against the harshness of the world it had been born into. Meanwhile, the mother, though still hidden, felt an overwhelming mix of emotions. Relief, because the baby was alive. Sorrow, because she could not hold it herself. Hope, because it might survive. She realized that her love had guided her actions, and that even in sacrifice, love could still nurture life. She had faced the impossible, made the hardest choice a mother could make, and now she could trust that her child's life had a chance. The weight of her decision pressed on her. Yet there was a strange sense of peace in knowing that she had acted out of the deepest love. Even when it hurt beyond measure, the days following the rescue were filled with quiet vigilance. The villagers took turns caring for the baby, making sure it had warmth, food, and safety. They shared their knowledge of childcare, teaching one another how to soothe the tiny cries, how to keep the baby clean, and how to nurture it back to strength. Slowly, the baby grew stronger, its tiny body filling out with the nourishment and care it was receiving. Each day it cried less in fear and more in expression, its presence bringing joy and purpose to those around it. The mother, watching from afar, saw the baby's growth and felt her heart lift in cautious hope. She imagined the child's life unfolding, each milestone achieved with the help of the villagers who had taken it in. First smiles, first giggles, first steps, all things she had feared it might never experience, were now within reach. Her sacrifice, made out of love and desperation, had created a chance for the child to live a life she could not have provided. Even though she remained unseen, her connection to the baby endured in the knowledge that she had acted for its survival. Each small sign of growth, each indication of health and vitality, was a testament to the power of her love and the courage of her choice. The villagers, too, began to form a protective bond with the child. They shared stories, taught it words, and offered warmth and comfort. In their care, the baby found not only safety, but a sense of belonging. The mother, though hidden and separated, knew that the child was being surrounded by the kind of love and attention she could not provide. And that knowledge brought her a bittersweet comfort. Her heart remained heavy, yet the relief of knowing the baby had a chance at life outweighed the sorrow she carried through the long nights. She would often think of the child sleeping peacefully, imagining the warmth of the blankets, the gentle hands caring for it, and the soft voices offering comfort. She whispered silent words of love into the night, hoping that somehow the child could feel them. Her mind returned to the river, to the act that had been so painful and necessary. And she understood that in that single act, she had offered the baby the greatest gift she could, a chance to survive and to be loved. The enormity of what she had done was staggering. Yet the proof of her choice was visible in the child's growing strength and health. The mother began to reflect on her own life, the hardships she had endured, and the impossible choices that poverty and circumstance had forced upon her. She thought about the love that had driven her actions, the courage it had taken to make a decision that no mother should ever have to make, and the hope that had guided her through the darkness. She realized that sometimes love required the deepest sacrifices, that the hardest choices could bring life where none seemed possible, and that even in the most desperate moments, hope could prevail. Days turned into weeks, and the baby's presence became a small beacon of life and joy for the villagers. They celebrated its first smile, its growing strength, the tiny signs of life that persisted despite the harsh beginning. The mother watched from a distance, her heart filled with love, sorrow, and hope. She understood that her act of letting go, though heartbreaking, had created the possibility for a future she could not have provided. In the safety and care of others, the baby's life was unfolding, and her love remained a silent, guiding force. Even as she returned to her own difficult life, she felt a quiet sense of peace. The knowledge that the baby was alive, cared for, and surrounded by warmth and kindness gave her strength to face the continuing hardships of her own existence. Each day she lived, she carried the memory of the child and the hope of its survival, a testament to the power of love and sacrifice. Though her heart ached, she knew that she had acted with courage, with love, and with the single-minded goal of giving the child a chance at life. And in that, she found a measure of comfort, a reason to continue, and a belief in the possibility of hope even in the darkest of times. Months passed, and the baby grew stronger and healthier each day under the care of the villagers. Its cries became sounds of expression rather than distress, and its tiny body filled out with nourishment and warmth. The mother, still watching from a distance, felt a mixture of relief, sorrow, and pride. She had made the hardest choice of her life, and now she could see that her love had created a chance for life. Each small milestone of the child, the first smile, the first laugh, the first steps, was a quiet victory in the world, a reminder that her sacrifice had not been in vain. The mother continued her own life. Struggling to survive in the harsh reality of her village, she collected firewood, fetched water, and performed small chores, often skipping meals to save what little she had. The nights remained cold and lonely, and the days were filled with physical labor and worry. Yet, in the midst of her hardship, she carried a small seed of hope. She knew that the baby she had left behind was alive, growing and being cared for. That knowledge became a source of strength, a reason to continue despite the challenges she faced. She sometimes thought about the future of the child, imagining the life it might have. Perhaps it would be adopted by a kind family. Perhaps it would grow up surrounded by love and support. Perhaps it would achieve things she could never have dreamed for it. She clung to these thoughts like lifelines, imagining a world where the child would thrive. In her heart, she celebrated each imagined success, even though she remained unseen and unknown to the life she had brought into the world. The villagers who had rescued the baby continued to care for it with dedication. They shared their knowledge, teaching one another how to provide nourishment, warmth, and comfort. The child became a part of the community, slowly forming bonds with those who nurtured it. Its laughter and growing curiosity brought joy to the villagers, and they marveled at the resilience of life. The mother, observing quietly from afar, felt a deep sense of gratitude. Though she could not be there herself, she had played a role in bringing this life into the world, and that knowledge filled her with quiet pride. Over time, the mother began to find ways to improve her own situation. She learned small skills that allowed her to earn more for herself. She found moments of comfort and support from those willing to help, and she discovered a resilience within herself she had not known existed. The experience of letting go of making an unimaginable choice had changed her. She had faced the impossible, acted out of love, and survived. Her strength and courage became a quiet source of empowerment, reminding her that even in despair, hope and action could create life and possibility. The memory of the baby remained with her, a constant companion in both joy and sorrow. She would sometimes imagine holding it, watching it grow, and guiding it through life. The longing never went away, but it transformed into a source of motivation. She worked harder, survived the cold nights, and faced the scarcity of food and warmth with renewed determination. Her sacrifice for the child had not only given it a chance, but it also taught her the depth of her own strength and the power of love that transcends presence. The child, growing strong and curious, became a symbol of hope in the village. The villagers who had cared for it told stories of the baby's survival, marveling at how a tiny life had been protected and nurtured. They spoke of the unknown mother, whose love and courage had given the child its first chance at life, though they never knew her identity. Her actions lived on in the child's growth, the community's care, and the ongoing ripple of compassion that had been set in motion. The mother, despite her hardships, began to rebuild small aspects of her own life. She found moments of joy, small successes, and personal growth. She learned that survival did not mean giving up hope, and that love could be expressed in ways beyond immediate presence. Her heart, once burdened with despair, carried both the memory of her sacrifice and the quiet pride in the life she had saved. Each day was a challenge, but also an affirmation that her actions had mattered, that even in darkness, she could create light. The bond between the mother and the child, though unseen and unspoken, remained powerful. She felt it in her dreams, in her prayers, in her quiet moments of reflection. The child's growth, safety, and happiness were a testament to her courage. And even though they were separated, her love continued to guide its life. In her heart, she knew that the choice she had made, though unbearably painful, had been an act of pure love, an offering of life over despair and hope over fear. As the years passed, the child thrived in the care of those who had found it. It grew curious, healthy, and loved, surrounded by kindness and warmth. The villagers' care created a foundation for a life filled with opportunities, safety, and affection. The mother, continuing her own journey, carried the knowledge of what she had done, the sacrifices she had made, and the love that had driven her actions. She knew that, though she might never see the child again, she had given it the most precious gift, a chance at life. In the end, the mother's story became one of quiet heroism, resilience, and hope. Her courage in the face of impossible circumstances, her willingness to make the hardest choice out of love, and her enduring hope for the child's survival defined her journey. Though separated from the child, her love continued to resonate, proving that even in the darkest moments, acts of compassion and sacrifice can create life, inspire others, and leave a lasting impact on the world. She had faced despair, acted with courage, and lived to witness the fruits of her love, a legacy that would never be forgotten.